Hi everyone, this is part 53 of ASP.NET. In this video, we'll try to discuss about security in ASP.NET. Let us see how to provide security for your web application in ASP.NET. So generally in ASP.NET we can provide security. Before going to security, you must know about some basics like first one, you must know about what is authentication. So authentication is nothing but authentication is the process of checking the user credentials. Authentication is the process of checking user credentials. Is it clear? User credentials means username and password. Process of checking the user credentials. Is it clear? User credentials means username and password. So here any user who is having username and password, that user is called as authenticated user. Any user who is having username and password, that user is called as authenticated user. You all are authenticated users of Gmail and Facebook because you'll try to log in with your username and password to access that particular application. Similarly, you must have the knowledge on what is authorization. Authorization means it is a process of assigning the roles and responsibilities for the authenticated user. Is it clear? Authorization is the process of assigning roles and responsibilities. Roles and responsibilities for the authenticated user. That is called as authorization. So authentication means who are you, authorization means what right you have. For example, if you develop any application to access a particular web page, you have two pages are there. One is admin.aspx, this is one page is there, and another one is user.aspx page is there. Two pages are there. So here this is authentication. Authentication means who are you. Authentication means who are you. Is it clear? Authentication will always ask you who are you. Means mostly login page you have to any website you can see the login page will be there. Enter username, enter password. Is it clear? Here you have one text box, here one more text box, and here one button is there. Some sign in button is there. So user will enter the username and password. So checking the user credentials are valid or not. That is called as authentication. Authorization means what right you have. Authorization means what right you have. Generally, if you take any website, single website will have multiple web pages are there. But any website you take, different types of users will be there. Visitor will be there, admin will be there, and employee will be there. For example, if you take IRCTC application, different types of users will be there. Admin will be there, and employee will be there. Customer will be there. Employee role is to add the train details, cancel the train details. Customer role is to search the trains, book the ticket, check for PNR status, cancel the tickets. That is the responsibility of customer. Visitor role is to create an account in IRCTC and all these things. View the schedules, everything. So if you take a website consists of multiple web pages. For example, if that website consists of some 100 web pages are there, and all these pages are not accessible by everyone. Roles and responsibilities was given. Admin role is different, employee role is different, visitor role is different. So which pages who can access? But everyone must be authenticated user. Employee is authenticated. Employee must log in with username and password. Customer must log in with username and password. But authorization means giving permissions for the authenticated user. Employee will have permission to access only some pages. He can only upload the train details. Customer permissions are different. So in this manner, if you want to provide security for your application in ASP.NET, your authorization means what right you have. Is it clear? What right you have? Both are authenticated, but what right you have? Here, for example, one user is there. Now here the user will log in with username and password. So he is an authenticated user. And then check. If the user is admin, he can access both the pages, admin page and user page. And if the login user is only user, he cannot access admin page. So providing permissions for the web pages, that is authorization. So generally in ASP.NET, if you want to provide security, we can provide security in three ways. One is by using Windows authentication. Other one is by using forms authentication. Another one is by using passport authentication. Three types of ways we can provide security. Other one is passport authentication. Nowadays another authentication is popular, that is authentication, open authentication. So mostly in interview point of view, they will ask you very basic questions on security, like what is authentication. You must be able to tell. Authentication is a process of checking the user credentials. User credentials means username and password. Any user who is having username and password, then that user is called as authenticated user. Authorization, it is a process of assigning the roles and responsibilities for the authenticated user. So authentication will always tell who are you. Authorization will always tell what right you have. So in ASP.NET, we can basically provide security in three ways: Windows authentication, forms authentication, passport authentication. Windows authentication means providing security for your particular ASP.NET application by using the local Windows users and groups. Mostly .NET Frame, Microsoft will provide security by default for your applications that you developed in ASP.NET. So providing security for your .NET framework by using the credentials of the Windows operating system. And if you are trying to log in with your operating system with Windows username and password, then you are an authenticated user to access all the services provided by Microsoft to work with .NET application. Whenever you work with Visual Studio Editor, sometimes you try to open, right click, run as administrator and everything. So Windows authentication is not related to the developer point of view. It is just for the framework, and .NET internal security will be provided by Microsoft. Mostly if you want to provide security for your application that was developed in ASP.NET, will use forms authentication. This forms authentication is also called as cookie based authentication. So here you say I'm trying to select empty web forms, click on OK. Let us do a small example. If you want to provide security for the web application that was developed in ASP.NET, we'll use forms authentication. Windows authentication is the default authentication, provides security for your .NET framework. And all the services, if you want to access successfully at the time of developing the application, Microsoft will provide some security. In order to access that particular services, you have to open that particular services in administrator mode. That is Windows authentication. Mostly will work with forms authentication only. So here you see, I'll try to go to my solution explorer. So go to view, there you can select solution explorer, and I want to create a new project here. So right click on the project, add new item. Right click on the project, add new item, select web form. There add new item, select web form. The name I will try to give something like some login.aspx. Login.aspx I'll try to give. Go to your design window here. So here I will try to go to project, and I will try to add one more page, add new item, and here I will try to select one more web form here. I want to rename that particular web form as success.aspx. Here I will try to change the name. Right click if you want, and here you can see rename. The name you can use success.aspx. So here two pages are there. One is login.aspx. So here go to your toolbox, and here you can drag and drop the control, login control from the toolbox. Here you have one login controls are there in your toolbox. Simply drag and drop login. Okay, now this is your success page. So if the login user is valid, I want to display welcome user, some message here. So I'll try to display one message. Here I'll try to write something like welcome user. This is your design window. So go to your login.aspx, and here if you want to modify the format, auto format is there. Just you can give colorful, click on OK. And here also if you want to increase the size, you can increase. Is it clear? So by default login control will have authenticate event. Now if the login user is valid, I want to go to success page. Otherwise it has to display the error message. So go to Solution Explorer. Here you can see web.config file. So what is web.config file means? Web.config file is a used to maintain the configuration settings that are required to run your ASP.NET web application. It is an XML file. It is used to maintain the session state modes manually, and it is used to maintain the authentication details manually. Which one? Web.config file. So if you want to implement any security, you have to write the code inside web.config file. So within this web.config file, here I'll try to write something like this. After this system.web, I'll try to open authentication. Or within this system.web, you can write authentication. Here I'll try to give mode. Mode is equal to forms. And here I'll try to give something like press enter. Authentication. I'm creating one user here actually. Mode is equal to forms. Here I'll try to write something like forms. And here I'll try to write default URL is equal to success.aspx. And here I'll try to give login URL is equal to login.aspx. Means by default login page will get executed. If the login user is successful, it will navigate to success page. This is your forms authentication. And within this you can open the credentials. I'm creating a 2 users. And here I'll try to give something like password format is equal to clear. So I want to create 2 users. Authentication means process of checking the user credentials. User credentials means username and password. So I'll try to create one user. Name is equal to Anil I will give. And here I'll try to password also I'll give one. Okay. And similarly here I'll try to create one more user. User credentials. Is it clear? So here I'll try to create one more user. Here I'll create user. Name is equal to Sunil. And here I'll give password. Password I'll give something like Sunil. So 2 users are there. One is Anil, other one is Sunil. Now these 2 users are authenticated. So if the login user is authenticated, he can access the destination page. He can access the destination page. So go to your login.aspx. Here double click the login control and write the code. By default, when user click on the button actually. This is not double click on button and write the code. Microsoft has given us separate control called login control. Okay now, so here if you want to work with security, here declare the namespace using system.web.security. Okay now, so here I'll try to write some code. If I will try to use if something like this. If forms authentication.authenticate, there is one predefined method called authenticate is a predefined method. That is a static method actually. Static method can be accessible by using class name. If forms authentication.authenticate off, here I'll try to give the username. I'll try to give login one dot username, comma. Here I'll try to give login one dot password. If forms authentication dot authenticate. And what is the meaning of this authenticate? It is checking whatever the values that you enter in the text boxes. It will compare these values with the values that you mentioned within your web.config file. If both are matching, then he is an authenticated user. Otherwise, he is an invalid user. Then I want to navigate from login page. Here I'll try to write something like forms authentication dot redirect from login page. Forms authentication dot redirect from login page of. It is asking me to give the username. Here I'll try to give login one dot username, comma true, because I want to store the username in the form of cookie. Otherwise, I want to display the error message. Login one dot failure text is equal to invalid user. Invalid user. So what is happening here? Whenever user enter the username and password, click on button, then this event will fire, and it will check the text box values. This is not text box one dot text. Text box values comparing with your authenticated user. If both are valid, it will go to success page. Otherwise, it will display the error message saying that invalid user. So there are 2 types of users are there. One is Anil, other one is Sunil. These 2 are authenticated users. So what is authentication means? Authentication is the process of checking the user credentials. User credentials means username and password. Any user who is having username and password, then that type of user is called as authenticated users. Authorization, we have not applied authorization. Authorization is the process of assigning the roles and responsibilities for the authenticated user. Authentication will always tell who are you. Authorization will always tell what right you have. Is it clear? So here by default login page will get executed because we have given the in web.config file login URL we have given login.aspx now. So by default login page will get executed. If the login user is successful, if the login user is authenticated user, then it will navigate to success page. That is default.aspx, success.aspx that we mentioned as the default URL. So generally whenever you work with security, you will get this error. Login control, whenever you work, you will get this error. Mostly validation controls, login control, you will get an error saying that unobtrusive JavaScript error will come. In order to rectify that error, what to do means go to web.config file. There you can see this code HTTP runtime target framework. Delete this code. Okay, na? And again you can debug. Build the solution and again press F5. So here I will try to give the username Anil, password I will give Anil. Click on login. So Anil is authenticated user. So it is going to what? As I mentioned, the cookie is true. So my username is stored in the form of cookie. It understood. Similarly, if I try to give Sunil, if I give any invalid username, it will display the error message, invalid user. If I give Sunil, Anil and Sunil, these two are authenticated users. So both can access the success page. Now authorization. It is a process of assigning the roles and responsibilities for the authenticated user. So I want to give some permissions here. So what to do? Go to your source code and after authentication, go to web.config file. And after authentication, you can take one more tag called authorization. Are you following? Here I'll try to take authorization. And here I'll try to write something like deny. Deny users is equal to star. Deny means don't allow anyone. Deny users is equal to star. Don't allow anyone to access the destination page. Even authenticated user also don't allow. So now Anil and Sunil both are authenticated users, but they both don't have the permission to access the success page because we have not given the permission. We told deny users is equal to star. Deny means don't allow anyone. So authorization is used to provide permissions, roles and responsibilities for the authenticated user. Now I'll log in with Anil. Anil is valid user, no doubt. Click on login. But here if you observe clearly, it has to suppose to go to success page, but again returning back to login page because of you don't have permission. Similarly, Sunil is also authenticated user, but don't have permission. Is it clear? That is about deny. If you try to write something like this in web.config file, if I write deny users is equal to Anil, and don't allow Anil, you can allow Sunil. Like this, you can provide security for your authenticated users who can access restricted pages and who cannot access the restricted pages. Interview point of view, that is more than enough about forms authentication. Is it clear? It is also called as a cookie based authentication where the usernames and passwords are saved in the form of cookie within your browser only. Now I will try to log in with Sunil and Sunil. Sunil have the permission, he can access. And for example, if I try to give Anil, and here if I give Anil, Anil don't have permission. Okay, na? That is how you can work with forms authentication. So that is how you can work with forms authentication. Next one is passport authentication. See nowadays what happened, there are multiple web applications are there. You take something like Swiggy, like Zomato or IRCTC, Flipkart, like thousands of applications are available on the World Wide Web. So multiple customers are accessing these applications. And if you ask every time the customer to log in, register the within that particular application, customer will irritate. It is difficult for the customer every time to register for every app. So there are some Microsoft related websites are there, like Hotmail is there, Outlook is there, something like Skype is there, like a lot of Microsoft related websites are there. And if the customer is having account in that particular Microsoft related website, he can directly access any of the other applications. For that, Microsoft has given a separate authentication called passport authentication. But unfortunately, Microsoft mailing services and all are not that much popular, like Gmail, or you can take Gmail now. With Gmail, you can access all the Google related applications like YouTube, Google Drive, Google Maps. With single Gmail username and password, you can access all the Google accounts. Similarly, In Microsoft also you have a Hotmail account is there. If you have a Hotmail account, you can directly access all the Microsoft related websites. For that you can use passport authentication, but mostly will not, never in real time, mostly will not use any passport authentication. Nowadays another authentication came, that is O authentication, means open authentication, because maximum customers will have the accounts in Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, all these things. So if the customer want to register any of the other application, it is again difficult for the customers to register the application manually. Manual registration is very difficult. So what happen nowadays means O authentication, means open authentication. Instead of again manually registering with in Swiggy or Zomato or any of the other applications directly, if you already have the account in Gmail or Twitter or Facebook, directly continue with Facebook, continue with Google. You can see in so many real-time applications. Though that type of authentications are called as O authentication, because these all websites will be there now. These individual websites will collect the user data, because already user given his basic information to all these popular websites. So these all applications will collect the information from that particular website. So again, user no need to register. Just continue with Facebook, continue with Google, something like that. That is O authentication. Okay, na? So this is how, just interview point of view, whatever I told, that is more than enough. What is authentication? What is authorization? How many ways we can provide security in ASP.NET? What is forms authentication? Forms authentication is also called as a cookie based authentication, where the usernames and the passwords are saved in the form of cookie within your browser. Okay, na? So way to declare the authentication modes means you can tell web.config file. For more videos, try to subscribe to this channel. Thank you. Have a nice day.